All right, everyone. Politico had a funny article the other day about how Trump was still thriving in areas that lacked trusted media outlets. I guess the idea is that if you have trusted local news, that they can feed you propaganda more ably than like a national, like a CNN or a Fox or something. Like they have a difficulty. They got huge audiences, but they're not really tethered to any specific community. They just happen to be like national cable news. But if they can partner with a local propaganda firm, aka like a WCAX, by the way, a year ago WCAX banned me from their Facebook page. Just another example of stupidity on Facebook. I think I have more fans, and I believe I have a larger audience at this point than WCAX does. At the very least, we're comparable. And I'm one person. I don't have a $10 million studio and 100 people working for me, which is hilarious. But if you can have a local propaganda outlet, you can push things more easily, because then you have a local face. You have someone from within that community, or at least nearby regionally or at the state level, that can sort of vouch for your shitty corporate policies. That's what this boils down to. It boils down to Politico is worried because most rural areas and a large proportion of all suburban areas in the United States, they follow the same traditional demographic trend of the last several decades, which is, hey, Republicans happen to do better in areas outside of the inner city. It's just sort of the way that it is. If you look at a map of the election, yeah, Trump wins virtually all counties. The Democrats hold on to a few urban cores and then a few more rural areas like here in Vermont, and states that, they just happen to be really, really blue. It would be like a Republican could manage to win in a semi-urban setting in a really, really red state, like Cheyenne or something like that. But generally speaking, 90% overlap between rural is more Republican, urban is more Democrat. That's really what Politico is saying here. You can simplify this story. It has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It has to do with traditional demographic trends. It's been that way for a long time. Well, the fact that Trump did better in the Rust Belt is largely economic in premise. It doesn't even have anything to do with like the immigration debate. It doesn't involve guns, although that's going to become a midterm issue. By the way, one the Democrats probably won't prevail on. No, it's mostly about money, basically. Let me explain it to you in a nutshell. You see, the problem is, yeah, a lot of these big corporate media outlets, including the online ones, they operate out of big cities. Most of their pundits, the CEO is from the big city. They're urbanites. They're kind of out of touch with, country bumpkins or small town America. I live in a small town sort of setting. Doesn't have a lot in common with Manhattan. There's the sort of laws and regulations and opinions and stuff that you have, the sort of economic premises that you need to thrive economically aren't the same as what a small town needs. The reason why Trump did well in a lot of those small town Rust Belt communities, economically speaking, is that Obama came along, did manage to preside over a recovery. The problem is that recovery took great effect in the coasts and urban areas, traditionally more left-leaning, more democratic. Everywhere else it fell flat. It never recovered. Those areas did not recover. Why the hell would anyone have any economic impetus, therefore, to vote for the Democratic Party that claimed that there was a recovery that they never saw and thus seemed out of touch by default? And it was partially. Obama comes out, these backwoods people clinging to their guns and Bibles. That's not the way that you campaign. It's not a good look. Hillary Clinton tried the same thing. We've had two Democratic individuals, one a president, the other Secretary of State and would-be president, candidate Hillary, essentially. Thank goodness she never took office. We've had two individuals, two high-hitting Democrats in a row, who have essentially insulted the same very large group of Americans. Obama with guns and Bibles and, backwoods, and then he devolves into using a little Southern twang for no reason, because he's basically Hawaiian. It doesn't make any sense to me. And then Hillary Clinton comes out with her deplorables coming. Oh, yeah, a certain proportion of all Americans, roughly 25% of the population, are irredeemable. They fall into one or more of the following. They're a Nazi, a sexist, they're fascistic in some manner, they're homophobes, they hate women, they hate gay people or something. And then there are people who voted for Trump that are none of those things. They were terrified of you starting a nuclear war. Of course, now we've got to call out Trump on the Syria thing. You're not going to find any hypocrisy from me just because fucking Trump happens to have an R after his name now. He had a D after his name 10 years ago, essentially. you know, until he started becoming the star of CPAC, because he said, hey, this is going to be fun. I'm going to get to talk down to all of these other very rich people because I happen to be one of the most rich. It's going to be hilarious, and then they'll suck me off for donations. That's why he's a Republican, not a Democrat. The Democrats have all sorts of big corporate banker allies and foreign donations. I think he saw that the tide was shifting. The Democrats were going to become the corporate party and hedged his bets on becoming a so-called Republican. But Politico's insinuation that Trump is thriving among low-info individuals, no, you idiot. No, he's thriving in areas that typically Republicans thrive in. It has nothing to do with Trump. It's been that way for 20, 30 fucking years in most of these communities. By the way, your defense of corporate and infotainment, which is what cable news is funny because you are directly insinuating as well that you should try to establish local propaganda outlets as opposed to getting maybe news online. I'm telling you this now. The fundamental difference between myself and a Bill O'Reilly or a Rachel Maddow or an Anderson Cooper or a Glenn Beck is not so much the absence of bias. I have my own bias, generally libertarian, classically liberal. Some people think that's far right. Other people call me far left for it. So, you know, the bias is definitely there and I own up to it. But there's the thing. Number one, I own up to the fact that, yeah, I have political bias. I have my own views, and I put them out there proudly because of my fucking YouTube channel. Number two, though, I don't have a corporation that's worth billions of dollars telling me what bias to have. Isn't that a novel idea? I'm actually independent because, you know, I've got 1,000 fans funding me and a bunch of people buying my books instead of, hey, you know, a corporation came along and said, hey, we'll give you $100,000 just to report what we want you to report. Hey, we'll pay you $250,000 salary to put on this suit and a monkey suit and stand in front of a camera reading a script. You know, you won't be independent at all for the most part, but, you know, we'll give you the vacation and we'll fly you around first class to these to disaster zones, and then you could stay there for a week and sip margaritas and pretend to care about people who are suffering. It's what you get from the legacy media. It's propaganda, and it's very expensive, inefficient propaganda. If you wanted to have efficient propaganda, there's a reason why these people are moving to the online sphere and trying to kick people like me off. They realize how much cheaper it is and how much more effective it is. They're trying to raise up a new crop, by the way, of people that seem independent but ultimately are controlled by corporations. I don't need to name names on that one. I've sparred with a number of them over time. Basically, young upstarts that they pretend to be part of the alt media, but ultimately they work for multi-million-dollar corporations. And through a surprisingly meritocratic process, this group will be whittled down to maybe the top 10%, and those will be the next crop of so-called independent analysts for the upper tiers of the cable news media, the big newsprint, the New York Times, the Fox, the CNNs, groups like that. They'll rise up from, you know, some of the smaller firms, a Salon, a Right Wing Watch, a Breitbart, a Blaze. Those are the lower tier of the corporate media, and then they'll go up a tier to larger firms, and then they'll rise up through. And that's how they do things. Because it's effective. It's a good way to make money. I mean, if it can be profitable, you can expect that they've thought of it already. The best way to defeat them is to inoculate people, let them know what's going on. And that's why they don't want people to be able to tell the truth online. And they don't want, by the way, progressives doing that any more than they want people on the further right or libertarians or whatever doing the same thing. So it's funny. So Politico thinks that if you still support Trump, you must be a low-info voter that's alienated from the corporate media. Well, no shit. You do realize that a majority of people in big cities also don't trust CNN and Fox and all these other groups too. Nor, by the way, do they trust Politico or Vox and some of these other groups that pretend to be more independent. Really, you work with the same people, for the same people, rub elbows with the same people, and report the same thing. What's the fucking difference other than you get $1 million instead of $10 million? What's the fucking difference? There is none. That's about all. Peace out.